The baby's screams cut through the sterile hospital air like shattered glass, each desperate wail scraping against Elena Moretti's heart until she couldn't breathe properly. She sat in the waiting room of Metropolitan Hospital at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, her grandmother's room number clutched in one hand, her guitar case resting against her thigh with the other. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that sickly yellow glow that made everyone look half dead already. People hurried past, nurses in scrubs, visitors with flowers, security guards with radios crackling, and every single one of them pretended not to hear the infant screaming her lungs out near the vending machines. Elena's fingers tightened on the strap of her guitar case. The baby sat in a carrier seat, maybe 8 months old, with dark curls plastered to her tear-soaked face and tiny fists beating the air. No parent, no guardian, just this terrified child surrounded by people who'd mastered the art of looking away. She should walk past, too. She had $127 in her checking account, rent due in 3 days, and a grandmother recovering from surgery who needed her. Getting involved in other people's problems wasn't something a woman barely keeping her own head above water could afford. But the baby's screams turned to choking sobs, and Elena's mother's face flashed through her memory. The way she'd looked in that hospital bed 20 years ago, the way she'd made Elena promise to always help children who were scared and alone. Elena stood up. "Where are you watching from? Have you ever helped a stranger without knowing it would change your entire life? Let me know in the comments." The waiting room went silent as Elena crossed the tile floor, her worn sneakers squeaking slightly. She felt eyes on her back, hospital staff watching from behind their desk, security guards suddenly very interested in this development. The air itself seemed to hold its breath as she knelt beside the carrier seat, setting her guitar case down gently. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the baby's distress. "Hey, it's okay." The infant's eyes, huge and brown and drowning in tears, locked onto Elena's face. Her screams hitched, confusion replacing pure terror for just a moment. Elena reached out slowly, telegraphing every movement like she did with the traumatized children at St. Mary's Community Center where she worked. Her fingers brushed the baby's cheek, and the child flinched but didn't pull away. "I know," Elena murmured. "I know you're scared. I know you want your mama." The baby's lower lip trembled. A fresh wave of tears spilled down her flushed cheeks, and Elena made a decision that would fracture her life into before and after. She unbuckled the carrier's straps and lifted the child into her arms. The baby's weight settled against Elena's chest, solid and real and desperately alive. Her little heart hammered like a hummingbird's wings, and her whole body shook with the force of her sobs. Elena stood slowly, swaying side to side in the rhythm her own mother had used when Elena was small and the nightmares came. "Ninna nana. Ninna, oh." Elena sang softly, the Italian lullaby rising from some deep place in her chest. "Questo bimbo a chilo do." The baby's screams faltered. Her tiny fingers clutched at Elena's shirt, a cheap cotton thing from Target that had seen better days, gripping the fabric like a lifeline. Elena kept swaying, kept singing, her voice low and steady as she poured every ounce of comfort she possessed into the melody her grandmother had taught her decades ago. "Lo darò alla Befana, che lo tiene una settimana." The sobs turned to hiccups. The baby's face pressed against Elena's neck, her breath hot and wet against Elena's skin. Around them, the waiting room remained frozen, everyone watching this strange tableau like it was happening on a television screen instead of right in front of them. Elena sang through the entire lullaby twice, then started over. Her arms began to ache from holding the child, but she didn't dare shift position. The baby's breathing gradually slowed, matching the rhythm of Elena's swaying. Her grip on Elena's shirt loosened slightly, and when Elena risked looking down, she found those huge brown eyes watching her with something that looked almost like trust. "That's it," Elena whispered between verses. "You're safe. I've got you." 20 minutes passed. Elena's legs cramped and her back protested, but the baby finally relaxed completely, her head heavy on Elena's shoulder. Her breathing evened out into the soft pattern of sleep, and Elena felt tears prick her own eyes at the relief of it. This child had been so terrified, so alone, and no one, not one single person in this entire hospital, had been willing to help her. Elena stroked the baby's dark curls, marveling at their softness. She wore expensive clothes, Elena noticed now. A designer onesie that probably cost more than Elena's entire outfit. Tiny shoes that were purely decorative. Whoever this child belonged to had money. So, where the hell were they? The automatic doors at the hospital entrance exploded inward. 3 black SUVs screeched to a halt outside, their headlights flooding through the glass. Elena's heart kicked into overdrive as 8 men in dark suits poured through the entrance like a military unit, their movements coordinated and purposeful in a way that made every survival instinct Elena possessed start screaming. The waiting room erupted into chaos. People scattered, pressing themselves against walls and diving behind furniture. The hospital staff behind their desk dropped to the floor. Security guards reached for their radios but froze when they saw the guns holstered under those expensive suit jackets. And then he walked in. Dante Rossi stood 6'3" and moved like violence incarnate, all controlled power, and barely leashed fury. His suit probably cost more than Elena made in 3 months, but it was splattered with blood. Dark stains across the white shirt, smears on his jacket sleeves. His face was all sharp angles and old scars, with a particularly vicious one cutting through his left eyebrow. But it was his eyes that made Elena's breath catch, dark and desperate and completely focused on the baby sleeping in her arms. "Who the hell are you?" His voice came out rough like he'd been screaming. He crossed the waiting room in 4 long strides, his men fanning out behind him with military precision. "Who the hell are you, and why are you touching my daughter?" Elena's mouth went dry. Her arms instinctively tightened around the baby, and she registered the shift in his expression. The way his jaw clenched, the way his hands flexed like he was restraining himself from ripping the child away from her. Her voice came out as a croak. She swallowed hard and tried again. She was crying. Everyone was ignoring her. "I couldn't." "You couldn't what?" He was close enough now that Elena could smell expensive cologne mixed with copper and gunpowder. "You couldn't mind your own goddamn business?" The baby stirred against Elena's chest, making a small sound of distress at the harsh voice. Elena turned her body slightly, shielding the child from his fury, and something flashed across his face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. She was terrified, Elena said, finding her spine somewhere beneath the fear. She'd been screaming for at least 30 minutes before I got here. No one would help her. "So you decided to play hero?" His eyes raked over her, taking in her cheap clothes, her worn sneakers, the guitar case at her feet. "What were you planning to do? Walk out of here with her?" "I was planning to comfort a scared baby until someone who gave a damn showed up." The words came out sharper than Elena intended, fueled by adrenaline and righteous anger. Where the hell were you? The slap would have been easier to take than the way his face crumpled. For just a second, the dangerous man disappeared, and Elena saw only a father who'd failed his child. His hands came up like he wanted to reach for the baby, but he stopped himself, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. "Give her to me." It wasn't quite a command, not quite a plea. Elena looked down at the sleeping child in her arms. The baby's face was peaceful now, her breathing deep and even, one small hand still gripping Elena's shirt. She looked so innocent, so perfectly unaware of the violence radiating from her father and his men. "She's asleep," Elena said quietly. "If I hand her over too quickly, she'll wake up scared again." "I said, give her to me." His voice dropped to something dangerous, and his men shifted behind him, hands moving toward their weapons. The baby's eyes fluttered open at the tension in the air. She saw her father and immediately began to whimper, her face scrunching up in preparation for another round of screaming. Elena reacted on instinct, pressing the child closer and starting to hum the lullaby again. The baby's whimpers stopped. She looked up at Elena with those huge brown eyes, then deliberately turned her face away from her father and burrowed against Elena's neck. The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Elena watched emotions war across Dante Rossi's face. Shock, hurt, something that might have been grief. His daughter, his own flesh and blood, had just chosen a stranger over him. "Lucia," he said, his voice breaking on the name. "Lucia, baby, it's Papa." The baby, Lucia, pressed harder against Elena, her small body trembling. Elena's heart broke for both of them, for this terrified child and the father who clearly loved her but didn't know how to reach her. "Sir," Elena said carefully, "maybe we should sit down. Let her wake up properly before—" "Don't tell me what to do with my daughter." But he sank into one of the waiting room chairs anyway, his head dropping into his hands. His men exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to handle their boss in this state. Elena lowered herself slowly into the chair beside him, still holding Lucia. The baby's breathing had evened out again, but she wasn't fully asleep. Elena could feel the tension in her small body, the way she stayed alert even as she pretended to rest. "What's your name?" Dante asked without looking up. "Elena. Elena Moretti." "Why are you here, Elena Moretti?" "My grandmother had surgery. I was visiting her when I heard Lucia crying." He finally lifted his head, and Elena saw the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "And you just decided to get involved?" "I'm a music therapist. I work with traumatized children at St. Mary's Community Center." She adjusted Lucia's weight slightly. "I've seen what happens when kids are left alone with their fear. It doesn't end well." Something shifted in his expression. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "A music therapist. That's why you were singing." "My grandmother taught me that lullaby when I was little, after my mother died." Elena didn't know why she added that last part, but it seemed important somehow. "How long has she been quiet?" "About 20 minutes before you arrived." Dante's jaw clenched again. "She hasn't stopped screaming for 6 weeks. Not since—" He cut himself off, but Elena heard everything he didn't say in that pause. "Every nanny we've hired quit within 3 days. The last one lasted 6 hours." Elena looked down at Lucia, at this beautiful child who'd been drowning in trauma with no one able to reach her. "What happened 6 weeks ago?" "That's none of your concern." "If you want me to help you understand why she won't go to you, it kind of is." His eyes flashed dangerously, and one of his men stepped forward. "Boss, you want me to—" "No." Dante held up a hand, his gaze never leaving Elena's face. "My wife died. Lucia was there when it happened." The pieces clicked together in Elena's mind. The blood on his clothes, the desperation in his eyes, the way Lucia flinched from loud voices. This baby had witnessed something terrible, and her father's world of violence had traumatized her beyond what most children her age could process. "I'm sorry," Elena said, meaning it. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Save your sympathy." He stood abruptly, and Lucia jerked awake with a small cry. "I need to get her home. Give her to me. Let me come with you." The words were out before Elena could think them through. "Just to help with the transition. She's comfortable with me right now, and if you try to take her, she'll scream." He looked at his daughter with such longing that Elena's chest ached. "She always screams when I try to hold her." "Then let me help, just for tonight, until she's settled." Dante studied her for a long moment, and Elena could practically see him weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Fine. But if you try anything—" "I'm trying to help a traumatized baby, that's all." He gestured to his men, and they moved as one toward the exit. Elena grabbed her guitar case and followed, Lucia still clutched against her chest. The baby watched everything with wide eyes, her small hand fisting in Elena's shirt again. The SUV's leather seats were butter soft, the interior smelling of expensive cologne and gun oil. Elena sat in the back with Lucia while Dante took the passenger seat, constantly turning to look at his daughter. Two of his men sat on either side of Elena, their presence making her hyper-aware of how small she was, how vulnerable. The city lights blurred past as they drove, leaving the hospital behind and heading into the hills where the wealthy lived behind gates and walls. Elena kept humming softly, keeping Lucia calm, but her mind raced. She'd just gotten into a car with a man whose clothes were covered in blood, surrounded by armed guards, heading to God knows where. But Lucia's small weight in her arms, the trust in those brown eyes, Elena couldn't regret it. Not yet. The estate appeared through the darkness like something from a movie. Iron gates that opened automatically, a long driveway lined with security lights, and finally a mansion that looked like it belonged to European royalty. Fountains glowed in the darkness, and Elena counted at least 6 armed guards patrolling the grounds. "Welcome to your new prison," one of the men beside her muttered, and Elena's blood ran cold. The car stopped, and Dante was out immediately, opening Elena's door himself. She climbed out carefully, keeping Lucia secure, and stared up at the massive house. Every window blazed with light, and she could see people moving inside. Staff, probably, waiting for their bosses. Return. "This way." Dante's hand landed on the small of her back, guiding her toward the entrance. His touch burned through her thin shirt, and Elena fought the urge to pull away. Inside, the mansion was even more overwhelming. Marble floors stretched in every direction, reflecting the light from crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than Elena's entire year's salary. Original artwork hung on the walls, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. Staff lined the entrance hall, maids in uniform, a butler in a formal suit, security personnel in tactical gear. They all stared at Elena with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion, but every single one of them looked at Lucia with something like relief. "Signor Rossi," the butler said, his Italian accent thick. "Thank God. We were so worried when—" "Later, Antonio." Dante's voice cut through the concern. "Clear the main floor. I need to speak with Miss Moretti privately." The staff scattered like leaves in wind, and suddenly Elena was alone in this massive house with a man whose reputation she was starting to piece together. Mafia. He had to be Mafia. The guns, the blood, the way everyone feared him. It all added up to a world Elena had only seen in movies. "Follow me," Dante said, and led her down a hallway lined with more expensive art. They ended up in a study that smelled of leather and old books. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held what looked like first editions, and a massive desk dominated the center of the room. Dante gestured to a leather couch, and Elena sat carefully, still holding Lucia. The baby had grown heavy in her arms, truly sleeping now, her face peaceful in a way that made Elena's heart squeeze. She looked so innocent, so perfect, so utterly unaware of the darkness surrounding her life. Dante poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, downed it in one swallow, then poured another. He stood at the window, his back to Elena, and she watched the tension in his shoulders, the way his free hand clenched and unclenched at his side. "My wife's name was Sophia," he said finally. "We met when we were young, before I inherited my father's business. She wanted out of this life. Wanted to take Lucia and disappear somewhere safe." He took another drink. "The Battaglias killed her as revenge. They broke into our home 6 weeks ago and shot her in front of our daughter." Elena's arms tightened around Lucia instinctively. Oh, God. Lucia hasn't been the same since. She screams whenever I try to hold her, won't let anyone comfort her, barely sleeps. We've had 5 nannies quit. 2 therapists refused to continue treatment, and I've been watching my daughter slip away from me day by day. He turned to face Elena, and the grief in his eyes was staggering. Then you show up and she stops crying in 20 minutes. So I need to know. What the hell did you do that no one else could? I didn't do anything special. I just... Elena looked down at Lucia's sleeping face. I just showed her she wasn't alone, that someone cared enough to stay. Everyone here cares about her, but they're all afraid of you. Elena met his gaze steadily. She can feel that fear. It makes her more scared because if the adults are afraid, then there must be something terrible happening. Dante's jaw worked like he was grinding his teeth. So, what do you suggest? I suggest you let me stay for a while. Help her process the trauma. Use music therapy techniques to... How much? Elena blinked. What? How much money do you want to stay and help my daughter? He moved to his desk, pulled out a checkbook. Name your price. I have a job, a life. I can't just... $50,000 a month. He wrote the number down like it meant nothing. Plus, room and board, full medical coverage, anything you need. 6 months minimum. Elena's mind reeled. $50,000 a month was more than she made in a year. It would pay off her student loans, cover her grandmother's care, give her financial security she'd never dreamed of. But it also meant staying in this world of violence and danger, tied to a man who terrified her and fascinated her in equal measure. I need to think about it, she said. You have until morning. He set the check on the desk. Antonio will show you to a guest room. Lucia can sleep with you tonight since she's comfortable with you. And if I say no? His eyes went cold. Then you walk out of here and forget you ever met us. But Lucia will go back to screaming, and I'll go back to failing my daughter. He paused. Your choice, Miss Moretti. Elena looked down at the sleeping child in her arms, at this innocent baby who'd already seen too much horror. She thought about walking away, about returning to her cramped studio apartment and her barely-there paycheck and her safe, predictable life. Then Lucia stirred, her small hand reaching up to touch Elena's face even in sleep, and Elena knew she'd already made her decision. She just wasn't ready to admit it yet. Antonio appeared to escort her upstairs, and Elena followed him through hallways that seemed to go on forever. The guest room he showed her to was larger than her entire apartment, with a king-sized bed, an ensuite bathroom, and a sitting area that overlooked the gardens. A crib had already been set up in the corner, complete with expensive bedding and a mobile that probably cost more than Elena's car. If you need anything, there's a phone by the bed, Antonio said. Dial 0 for the kitchen, 1 for security, 2 for Mr. Rossi's private line. Thank you. He nodded and left, closing the door softly behind him. Elena stood in the middle of the opulent room, still holding Lucia, and felt the weight of her situation settle over her like a physical thing. She was trapped here, at least for tonight, in a world she didn't understand with a man who could probably make her disappear without anyone asking. Questions. She should be terrified. And she was. But she was also something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Elena carried Lucia to the crib and laid her down gently, expecting her to wake and start crying. But the baby simply rolled onto her side, her thumb finding her mouth, and continued sleeping peacefully. Elena stood there for a long time, watching her breathe, marveling at the resilience of children. A soft knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find a maid holding a stack of clothes. Signor Rossi thought you might need these, the woman said in accented English. They belonged to Signora Sofia. You're about the same size. Elena took the clothes automatically, her mind catching on that detail. She'd be wearing a dead woman's clothes, sleeping in a dead woman's house, caring for a dead woman's child. The wrongness of it made her stomach turn. Thank you, she managed. The maid left, and Elena closed the door again. She looked at the clothes, expensive designer labels, silk and cashmere, things she'd never owned in her life. She set them on the bed and moved to the window instead, staring out at the lit gardens and the armed guards patrolling the perimeter. What the hell had she gotten herself into? A soft cry from the crib pulled her attention back. Lucia was awake, her eyes wide and searching in the dim light. When she saw Elena, her face crumpled and Elena rushed over before she could start screaming. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm here." She lifted Lucia out of the crib, and the baby immediately wrapped her arms around Elena's neck in a death grip. "I'm right here. You're safe." Lucia's small body trembled, and Elena felt wetness against her neck, tears, silent and somehow more heartbreaking than screams. This baby had learned that crying brought no comfort, so she'd stopped asking for it. She just held on and endured. "Oh, honey," Elena whispered, carrying her to the armchair by the window. "It's okay to cry. It's okay to be scared. I've got you." She started singing again, that same Italian lullaby, and Lucia's trembling gradually eased. Elena rocked her gently, stroking her dark curls, pouring every ounce of comfort she possessed into the moment. Outside, the guards continued their patrol, and somewhere in this massive house a grieving father tried to figure out how to save his daughter. Elena looked down at Lucia's face, at the trust beginning to bloom in those brown eyes, and made her decision. She'd stay, not for the money, though God knows she needed it. Not because she was trapped, though she probably was. She'd stay because this baby needed her, and Elena had never been able to walk away from a child in pain. "I'll help you heal," she promised softly. "I don't know how yet, but I will. You're going to be okay, Lucia. I promise." The baby's eyes drifted closed again, her breathing evening out, and Elena continued rocking her as dawn began to lighten the sky. She'd stepped into a world of violence and danger, into a life that should terrify her, but all she could feel was the weight of this child in her arms and the determination burning in her chest. Her life would never be the same. She'd known it the moment she picked up that crying baby in the hospital. But sitting here in this borrowed room, wearing yesterday's clothes, holding a Mafia boss's traumatized daughter, Elena couldn't bring herself to regret it. Not yet. Morning came with soft light filtering through expensive curtains and the smell of coffee drifting from somewhere downstairs. Elena had maybe slept 2 hours, dozing in the armchair with Lucia on her chest, too afraid to put her down in case she woke up terrified. Her back screamed in protest when she finally stood, and her arms had gone numb from holding the baby, but Lucia was still sleeping peacefully. A knock at the door made her freeze. "Come in," she called softly. Dante entered, and Elena's breath caught at the transformation. He'd showered and changed into fresh clothes, dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms marked with old scars. His hair was still damp, and he'd shaved, making him look younger and somehow more dangerous. "She slept?" he asked, his eyes locked on his daughter. "Most of the night. She woke up once around 2, but I got her back down." He moved closer, and Elena caught the scent of expensive soap and coffee. "And you? Did you sleep?" "Enough." His eyes raked over her, taking in her rumpled clothes, the circles under her eyes, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. "You look like hell." "Thank you. That's exactly what every woman wants to hear first thing in the morning." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Have you made your decision?" Elena looked down at Lucia, at this baby who'd trusted her enough to sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks. Then she looked at Dante, at the desperate hope he was trying to hide behind his cold exterior. "I'll stay," she said, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "I need to visit my grandmother twice a week. I need to be able to contact my friends so they don't think I've been kidnapped. And I need you to promise that you'll work with me on this, that you'll follow my guidance when it comes to Lucia's care." "Done." He didn't even hesitate. "Anything else?" "Yes." Elena straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. "I need you to understand that healing takes time. There's no quick fix for what Lucia's been through. It might take months before she's comfortable with you again, and you need to be patient with that." Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or resignation. I've been patient for 6 weeks. And you'll need to be patient for 6 more, or 12, or however long it takes. Elena adjusted Lucia's weight. Can you do that? He stared at his daughter for a long moment, his jaw working. For her? I'd wait. Forever. The raw honesty in his voice made Elena's chest tighten. This wasn't just a Mafia boss trying to solve a problem. This was a father who loved his daughter desperately and had no idea how to reach her. Then we have a deal, Elena said. Dante pulled a phone from his pocket and made a call. Antonio, have Miss Moretti's things collected from her apartment and brought here. Also, contact her employer and inform them she's taking a leave of absence. He glanced at Elena. Address? She gave it to him, her mind reeling at how quickly her life was being rearranged. Within minutes, Dante had made arrangements for her grandmother's continued care, had her student loan information to begin payments, and had assigned her a security detail for her twice-weekly visits. You work fast, Elena said when he finally hung up. I don't waste time when I want something. His eyes met hers, and the intensity there made her skin prickle. Welcome to the family, Miss Moretti. The days that followed blurred together in a routine that felt both foreign and strangely natural. Elena woke with Lucia at dawn, spent mornings doing music therapy sessions in the sunlit nursery, afternoons exploring the gardens and introducing sensory play, and evenings singing lullabies until the baby finally slept. Dante watched from doorways and windows, never interfering but always present, his eyes tracking his daughter's every movement. The staff gradually warmed to Elena. The maids started leaving fresh flowers in her room. The cook learned her coffee preferences. Antonio began greeting her with genuine smiles. But there was always an undercurrent of something else, whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, phone calls Dante took behind closed doors, the occasional appearance of blood on his clothes when he returned late at night. Elena learned to exist in 2 worlds simultaneously. During the day, she focused on Lucia, using rhythm instruments to help her process trauma, singing songs to regulate her nervous system, creating safe spaces where the baby could explore without fear. At night, she lay awake listening to raised voices from somewhere in the house, to cars coming and going at odd hours, to the reality of the violence that funded this beautiful prison. 3 weeks in, everything changed. Elena sat in the garden on a blanket with Lucia, her guitar resting against her knee as she played a simple melody. The afternoon sun warmed her skin, and birds sang in the trees overhead. Lucia had been making progress. She'd started babbling again, had begun to explore her surroundings with more confidence, and the constant fear in her eyes had started to fade. But she still hadn't laughed. Not once. Elena strummed a chord progression she'd been working on, something bright and playful, and added silly lyrics about butterflies and sunshine. Lucia watched her with those serious brown eyes, her expression thoughtful. Then it happened. A giggle burst from Lucia's mouth, surprised and delighted and utterly joyful. She clapped her tiny hands together, bouncing on her bottom as Elena continued playing. Another giggle followed, then another, until the baby was laughing so hard she toppled over onto the blanket. Elena's vision blurred with tears. She set the guitar aside and scooped Lucia up, spinning her gently as she sang, "There's my girl! There's my happy girl!" Lucia laughed and laughed, her small hands patting Elena's face, and Elena felt something crack open in her chest, something that felt dangerously like love. "Again!" Lucia demanded, her first real word beyond Lena. Elena laughed through her tears and spun her again, and Lucia's delighted squeals filled the garden. She didn't notice Dante standing at the garden gate, didn't see the way he froze at the sound of his daughter's laughter, didn't witness his own tears falling silently as he watched them together. When Elena finally looked up, he was there, standing perfectly still with his hands gripping the iron gate and his face transformed by grief and hope, and something Elena couldn't quite name. Their eyes met across the garden, and the moment stretched between them like a living thing. "She laughed," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "She laughed," Elena confirmed, her own voice thick with emotion. He moved toward them slowly, as if afraid any sudden movement might shatter the moment. Lucia saw him coming and pressed closer to Elena, but she didn't start crying. Progress. "Can I—" Dante stopped a few feet away, his hands flexing at his sides. "Can I try to hold her?" Elena's heart ached for him. "Let's take it slow. Why don't you sit down on the blanket with us?" He lowered himself to the ground, and Elena noticed how carefully he moved, how he made himself smaller and less threatening. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and kept Lucia in her lap. "Hey, Lucia," Elena said softly. "Look who came to visit. It's Papa." Lucia peeked at her father, then buried her face against Elena's chest. But she didn't cry, and that was something. "Tell her about your day," Elena suggested to Dante. "Just talk to her. Let her hear your voice being gentle." So he did. He told Lucia about the ducks he'd seen on the pond that morning, about the new flowers blooming in the garden, about how much he loved her. His voice was soft and careful, nothing like the commanding tone he used with his men, and Elena found herself leaning slightly toward him without meaning to. Lucia listened, her small body gradually relaxing. After several minutes, she turned her head to look at her father, studying him with those serious eyes. "Hi, baby girl," Dante whispered, and his voice held such longing that Elena's throat tightened. Lucia didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. They stayed like that for a long time, father and daughter watching each other across, the small distance that felt like miles, with Elena as the bridge between them. That evening, for the first time since Sophia's death, Dante joined them for Lucia's bedtime routine. He sat in the armchair while Elena rocked the baby, and when Elena started singing the lullaby, he joined in. His voice was rough and unpracticed, but Lucia's eyes widened at the sound, and she reached one small hand toward him. Elena's breath caught. "Do you want to try holding her while I sing?" Dante looked terrified, but he nodded. Elena stood carefully and transferred Lucia to his arms, and the baby went stiff for a moment before relaxing slightly. Elena knelt beside the chair and continued singing, her hand resting on Lucia's back, and slowly, so slowly, the baby's eyes drifted closed. Dante's face as he held his sleeping daughter was something Elena knew she'd remember forever. The fierce love, the careful tenderness, the way his large hands cradled her so gently it made Elena's chest ache. This was a man who could kill without hesitation, who ruled a criminal empire with an iron fist, but who held his daughter like she was made of glass. "Thank you," he whispered, his eyes never leaving Lucia's face. "You're welcome." They sat in silence for a while, Elena still kneeling beside them until Lucia was deeply asleep. Then Dante carefully transferred her to the crib, tucking her in with movements that were almost reverent. Outside the nursery, he caught Elena's arm gently. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't quite a command either. Elena followed him through the quiet house and out onto the terrace that overlooked the gardens. The night air was cool and smelled of jasmine, and the security lights cast everything in soft gold. "I need to tell you something," Dante said, leaning against the stone railing. "About Sophia. About what happened." Elena waited, giving him space to find the words. "We met when we were kids. She was the daughter of one of my father's associates, and I fell in love with her the first time I saw her." He stared out at the darkness. She didn't want this life. The violence, the danger, the constant fear. She wanted to take Lucia and disappear, start over somewhere safe. "Why didn't you let her?" "Because I'm a selfish bastard who couldn't imagine my life without her." His hands gripped the railing. "And because I thought I could protect them. I thought my power, my reputation, would keep them safe. But the battalias..." Broke into our home as revenge for something my father did decades ago. They killed Sophia in front of our daughter to hurt me, to show me that no matter how powerful I am, I can't protect the people I love." His voice dropped to something raw. "And they were right. I failed her. I failed them both." Elena moved to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "You didn't fail Lucia. She's still here, and she's healing. Because of you, not me. Because of both of us." Elena turned to face him. "You brought me here. You're learning to be gentle with her. You're trying, Dante. That matters." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Elena felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. "Why are you doing this? Really? It's not just about the money." "No," Elena admitted. "It's not." "Then why?" She thought about her answer carefully. "Because I know what it's like to lose a parent. I know what it's like to be scared and alone and have no one who understands. And I know what it's like to have someone show up and prove that you matter, that you're worth saving." She paused. "My mother died when I was 8. Cancer. And my grandmother took me in even though she barely had enough money to feed herself. She saved me, Dante. And now I'm trying to save Lucia. You're doing more than that." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "You're saving me, too." The touch sent electricity through her entire body. Elena's breath caught, and she saw her own awareness reflected in his eyes. The air between them felt charged, dangerous, like standing too close to a lightning strike. "Dante!" His phone rang, shattering the moment. He pulled away with a curse, answering it with a sharp, "What?" His expression hardened as he listened. "When? How many? Fuck, I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and looked at Elena with something like regret. "I have to go. There's a situation that needs handling." "The kind that involves blood on your clothes?" "Probably." Elena should have been horrified, should have pulled away, reminded herself of who he was and what he did. Instead, she found herself reaching out to straighten his collar, her fingers lingering on the fabric of his shirt. "Be careful," she said. His eyes darkened. "Why, Miss Moretti? Would you miss me?" "Lucia would miss you." "And you?" Elena met his gaze steadily. "I'd miss you too." He leaned in, and for a heart-stopping moment, Elena thought he was going to kiss her. But he just pressed his lips to her forehead, lingering there for a breath before pulling away. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll be back before dawn." He left, and Elena stood on the terrace alone, her fingers touching the spot where his lips had been and her heart racing in her chest. She was falling for him. Despite everything she knew, despite the danger and the violence and the impossibility of it all, she was falling for Dante Rossi. And that terrified her more than anything else in this strange new world. The next morning brought a shift in the house's atmosphere. Elena woke to find extra security guards patrolling the grounds and staff speaking in hushed, worried tones. Dante had returned just before dawn, as promised, but she'd seen him through her window, blood on his hands, exhaustion in every line of his body. She found him in his study after breakfast, staring at his computer screen with dark circles under his eyes. "You should sleep," she said from the doorway. He looked up, and something in his expression made her stomach drop. "Close the door." Elena did, her heart racing. "What's wrong?" "The Battaglias know about you." He stood, moving around his desk toward her. "They know about Lucia's nanny who tamed the boss's daughter, and they're planning to use that information." Ice flooded Elena's veins. "Use it how?" "They want to kidnap you. Use you as bait to draw me out." His jaw clenched. "They think you're my weakness now." "Am I?" The question came out before Elena could stop it. Dante's eyes met hers and she saw the truth there before he spoke. "Yes." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Elena's breath came faster and she pressed her back against the door for support. "What do we do?" she asked. I'm increasing security. You'll have armed escorts everywhere you go, including to visit your grandmother. The house is going into lockdown. No one in or out without my explicit permission." He moved closer, and Elena could smell coffee and exhaustion on him. "And you need to learn emergency protocols. Where the safe rooms are, how to protect Lucia if we're attacked, what to do if someone gets past our defenses." "You think they'll attack here?" "I think they'll try." His hand came up to cup her face again, and Elena leaned into the touch without thinking. "But I won't let them take you. I won't lose anyone else." The rawness in his voice broke something in Elena. She reached up to cover his hand with hers, and they stood there for a moment, connected by touch and fear, and something neither of them was ready to name. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. "I'm not leaving Lucia." "Even if it means putting yourself in danger?" "Even then." His thumb stroked her cheekbone, and his eyes searched her face like he was memorizing every detail. "You're either very brave or very stupid." "Maybe both." This time when he leaned in, he didn't stop. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and desperate, and full of everything they'd been holding back. Elena's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and he groaned against her mouth as his arms came around her waist. The kiss deepened, turned hungry, and Elena forgot about danger and fear and all the reasons this was a terrible idea. All she could feel was the solid warmth of his body against hers, the way his hands held her like she was precious, the taste of coffee and need on his lips. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "This is a bad idea," he said. "Terrible idea," Elena agreed. "You should run, get as far from me as possible." "I should." She pulled him down for another kiss. "But I won't." His phone rang again, and they both groaned. He answered it without moving away from her, his free hand still on her waist. "This better be important," he growled into the phone. His expression changed as he listened. "How credible is the intel? When? Fuck. Double the guards at all entry points and get Carlo on the phone. Now." He hung up and looked at Elena with something like fear. "They're moving tonight. The battalions are planning to hit us during Lucia's medical checkup tomorrow. Then we cancel the appointment. She needs her vaccinations. The pediatrician said they can't wait any longer." Elena's mind raced. "So we go. We have guards. We take every precaution. Or you stay here in a safe room while I handle this. And leave Lucia to go to a scary doctor's appointment without me. She'll be terrified. She'll be alive." Elena pulled away from him, anger flaring. "Don't you dare use Lucia as leverage. If we're going to do this, if we're going to be whatever this is, then you need to trust me to make my own choices." "Even if those choices might get you killed?" "Yes." She straightened her spine. "I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting, Dante. I'm a grown woman who knows the risks and chooses to stay anyway." He stared at her for a long moment, emotions warring across his face. Finally, he nodded. "Fine. But you wear body armor under your clothes. You follow Carlo's instructions exactly, and if things go bad, you protect Lucia first. Promise me." "I promise." "Say it. Say you'll protect her before yourself." Elena met his gaze steadily. "I'll protect Lucia before myself. Always." Something in his expression softened. "You're going to give me a heart attack, you know that?" "Good. Keeps you on your toes." He pulled her back into his arms, and they stood there for a while, holding each other in the quiet study while danger gathered outside their walls. Elena pressed her ear to his chest and listened to his heartbeat, steady and strong and alive, and tried not to think about all the ways this could end badly. The pediatrician's office was on the third floor of a medical building downtown, in a neighborhood that was nice but not so exclusive that their convoy would stand out. Elena sat in the back of the SUV with Lucia on her lap, wearing body armor under a loose shirt and trying to keep her breathing steady. Carlo sat beside her, his hand resting on his weapon. Remember the plan. We go straight to the elevator, straight to the third floor, straight into the office, no stopping, no deviations. I remember. And if shooting starts, I drop, cover Lucia with my body, and wait for your signal. He nodded approvingly. Good girl. Dante was in the lead vehicle with most of his men, scouting ahead and clearing the route. Elena could see his SUV through the front windshield, and knowing he was close made her feel slightly less terrified. They pulled up to the building, and Carlo's radio crackled. All clear. Move now. Elena climbed out with Lucia, and immediately 4 guards surrounded them in a tight formation. They moved as one toward the entrance, and Elena kept her eyes on Lucia's face, trying to keep the baby calm despite the tension radiating from everyone around them. The elevator ride felt like it took forever. Lucia started to fuss, picking up on Elena's anxiety, and Elena hummed softly to soothe her. The doors finally opened on the 3rd floor, and they stepped out into silence. The hallway was empty. Too empty. No nurses, no patients, no sound of a busy medical practice, just fluorescent lights humming overhead and that particular smell of antiseptic and fear. Carlo's hand went to his weapon. Something's wrong. The pediatrician's office door stood open, and Elena could see the waiting room beyond. Also empty, chairs still arranged neatly, magazines on the table, but no people anywhere. Boss, Carlo said into his radio. We've got a situation. 3rd floor is clear. Too clear. Dante's voice crackled back. Get them out, now. They turned toward the elevator, but the doors were already closing. Carlo lunged for them, but he was too late. The lights went out. In the darkness, Elena heard movement. Footsteps, whispered commands, the distinctive sound of weapons being cocked. She dropped to her knees instinctively, curling her body around Lucia as the baby started to cry. Down! Carlo shouted, and gunfire erupted. The muzzle flashes lit the hallway in strobing bursts, and Elena pressed Lucia's face against her chest to shield her from the sight. Bullets whined overhead, and glass shattered as the office windows exploded. Someone screamed, one of their guards, and Elena heard the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. Carlo returned fire, his movements precise and controlled even in the chaos. Stay down. Don't move. More footsteps, coming from the stairwell. Elena risked a glance and saw 3 men in tactical gear emerging, their weapons raised. One of them spotted her and Lucia, and his gun swung in their direction. Elena didn't think. She turned, putting her back to the gunman, covering Lucia completely with her body. The bullet hit her shoulder like a sledgehammer, spinning her around and sending her crashing into the wall. Pain exploded through her chest, white-hot and all-consuming, but she kept her grip on Lucia. I've got you, she gasped, even as her vision started to gray at the edges. I've got you, baby. She stumbled toward the stairwell door, her legs barely holding her up. Blood soaked through her shirt, warm and sticky, but she couldn't stop. Lucia was screaming now, her small hands gripping Elena's shirt, and Elena used that sound as an anchor, proof that the baby was still alive, still safe. The stairwell door opened and Elena half fell through it, tumbling down the first few steps before catching herself on the railing. Lucia's weight shifted, and Elena adjusted her grip desperately, protecting the baby's head even as her own body screamed in protest. Stay with me, she whispered to Lucia. Stay with me, sweetheart. She heard shouting from above. Carlo's voice, other guards, and then a roar that could only be Dante. Footsteps thundered down the stairs, and Elena tried to move faster, but her legs wouldn't cooperate anymore. She sank down onto the landing, still clutching Lucia, as darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. The door above burst open, and Elena looked up to see Dante framed in the doorway. His face was splattered with blood, his eyes wild, and when he saw her, saw the blood soaking her shirt, saw Lucia in her arms, something broke in his expression. Elena! He was down the stairs in seconds, dropping to his knees beside her. Elena, Stay with me. Lucia first, she managed to say. Check Lucia first. He took his daughter with shaking hands, running them over her small body, checking for injuries. She's okay. She's not hurt. But you… Fuck, Elena, you're bleeding. Bullet. The word came out slurred. Shoulder. Not that bad. You took a bullet for her. His voice broke on the words. You took a bullet meant for my daughter. Told you. Elena tried to smile but wasn't sure if her face was cooperating. Protect her. Always. Dante's hand pressed against her shoulder, trying to slow the bleeding, and Elena gasped at the pressure. Lucia was crying, reaching for her, and Elena wanted to comfort her but couldn't make her arms work properly. I've got you, Dante said, his voice rough with emotion. Both of you. I've got you. He lifted Elena carefully, cradling both her and Lucia against his chest, and carried them down the stairs. Elena could hear sirens in the distance, could hear Carlo shouting orders, could feel Dante's heart racing against her cheek. She tried to stay conscious, tried to keep her eyes open, but the darkness was so inviting. Stay with me, Dante commanded. That's an order, Miss Moretti. You don't get to leave us now. Bossy, Elena mumbled. You have no idea. His arms tightened around her. Ambulance is 2 minutes out. Just hold on. Elena looked up at Lucia, at the terror in those brown eyes, and forced herself to stay present. It's okay, baby. Mama's okay. The word slipped out before she could stop it. Mama, and Dante's breath caught, but Elena was too far gone to take it back, to explain, to do anything but close her eyes and let the darkness take her. She woke to white walls and the steady beep of monitors. Pain radiated from her shoulder, duller now but still present, and when she tried to move, her whole body protested. Don't. Dante's voice came from beside the bed, and Elena turned her head to find him sitting in a chair pulled close, Lucia asleep in his arms. The bullet's out. You're going to be fine. Lucia. Not a scratch on her, thanks to you. His eyes were red-rimmed, haunted. You could have died, Elena. But I didn't. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. How long have I been out? 16 hours. My personal surgeon did. The operation here at the house. You're in the medical wing. Elena looked around, taking in the private room that was nicer than most hospital suites. The attackers? Dead. All of them. His voice went cold. And the battalias will pay for this. I promise you that. How many of your men? 5. Pain flashed across his face. 5 good men who died protecting you and Lucia. Carlo survived, but he's in surgery now. Elena's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Don't. They knew the risks. They died doing their job. He adjusted Lucia's weight carefully. She won't leave your side. Every time I try to put her down, she starts screaming. She knows you saved her. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Lucia's eyes fluttered open. She saw Elena and immediately started crying, reaching for her with desperate hands. Dante stood and carefully transferred her to Elena's lap, mindful of her injured shoulder. Lena, Lucia sobbed, patting Elena's face with her small hands. Lena hurt. I'm okay, sweetheart. Elena wrapped her good arm around the baby, ignoring the pain the movement caused. I'm okay. See? I'm right here. Lucia pressed her face against Elena's chest, her small body shaking with sobs, and Elena held her as tightly as she could manage. Over the baby's head, she met Dante's eyes, and the raw emotion there took her breath away. You called yourself her mama, he said quietly, in the stairwell. You called yourself her mama. Elena's heart stuttered. I didn't mean… She's been calling for you all day. Mama, mama, mama. His voice was thick with emotion. She chose you, Elena, and so did I. The weight of those words settled over the room like a blanket. Elena looked down at Lucia, at this baby who'd claimed her heart, then back up at Dante. I love her, she admitted. I know I shouldn't. I know she's not mine, but I love her like she is. She is yours." Dante moved closer, his hand coming to rest on Elena's good shoulder. "You bled for her. You almost died for her. That makes you her mother in every way that matters. And what does that make us?" His thumb stroked her collarbone, his touch gentle despite the violence he was capable of. "That makes us a family. Broken and unconventional and probably doomed, but a family nonetheless." Elena should have protested, should have pointed out all the reasons this couldn't work, the danger, the violence, the fundamental incompatibility of their worlds. But Lucia was warm and solid in her arms, and Dante was looking at her like she'd hung the moon, and Elena couldn't bring herself to care about logic. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Even after the 6 months are up. I'm not leaving either of you." "Good." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then finally her lips, soft and careful and full of promise. "Because I'm not letting you go." Lucia made a sound of protest at being squished between them, and they both laughed. Quiet and a little broken, but real. Elena adjusted the baby's position, and Lucia settled with a sigh, one hand gripping Elena's shirt and the other reaching for her father's. "Both," she said firmly. "Mama and Papa." Dante's eyes filled with tears, and Elena watched him struggle for composure. "Yeah, baby girl, Mama and Papa." They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them tangled together on the hospital bed, connected by touch and love and shared trauma. Outside, Dante's men hunted the remaining battalias. Outside, the world continued its violent spin. But in this room, in this moment, they were safe. Elena's recovery took 2 weeks, during which she learned exactly how ruthless Dante could be when someone threatened his family. The battalia's operations crumbled overnight. Warehouses burned, key members arrested or disappeared, their financial networks dismantled with surgical precision. The news reported it as a gang war, but Elena knew the truth. She'd seen the blood on Dante's clothes, had heard the phone calls in the middle of the night, had watched him transform into the monster his enemies feared. And she'd accepted it. Not easily, not without internal struggle, but she'd accepted it because she understood now that this violence protected them, that Dante's ruthlessness was the price of their safety. The revelation of a traitor in his own organization had been the hardest to witness. Antonio, the kind butler who'd welcomed her so warmly, had been feeding information to the battalias for months. Elena had watched Dante's face as he'd confronted the man, had seen the betrayal and fury there, and she'd known what would happen next. She'd stayed in her room with Lucia that night, singing lullabies to drown out the sounds from the basement, and when Dante had appeared at her door hours later, exhausted and blood-stained and broken, she'd simply opened her arms. He'd collapsed against her, and she'd held him while he shattered, this powerful man who carried so much weight. And when he'd finally pulled himself together, he'd looked at her with something like wonder. "You're still here," he'd said. "I told you. I'm not leaving. Even knowing what I am, what I'm capable of." Elena had cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I know exactly what you are, Dante Rossi, and I'm choosing you anyway." Now, 3 weeks after the attack, Elena stood in the garden where Lucia had first laughed and watched the baby toddle around chasing butterflies. Her shoulder still ached, but the scar was healing cleanly, and she could use her arm again without too much pain. Dante appeared beside her, sliding an arm around her waist and pulling her against his side. "She's getting fast." "She's determined. Wonder where she gets that from." He huffed a laugh and pressed a kiss to her temple. "I need to talk to you about something." The seriousness in his tone made Elena's stomach clench. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. He turned her to face him, his hands settling on her hips. "I need to ask you something important, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." "You're scaring me." "Don't be scared." He took a deep breath. "Marry me." Elena's brain short-circuited. "What?" Marry me. Make this official. Make us a real family." His thumbs stroked her hip bones through her shirt. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months. But I also know that I love you, and Lucia loves you. And I don't want to spend another day without knowing you're ours forever. Dante, I can't promise you a normal life. I can't promise you safety or peace or any of the things you deserve. But I can promise that I will love you with everything I have, that I will protect you and Lucia with my last breath, and that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of what you've given us." Elena's vision blurred with tears. "You're already worthy." Is that a yes? She wanted to say yes. God, she wanted it so badly she could taste it. But doubt crept in. Doubt about whether she could really do this, whether she could really commit to this life, whether love was enough to bridge the gap between who she'd been and who she was becoming. "I need time," she said, and watched his face fall. "Not because I don't love you. I do. I love you so much it terrifies me. But this is a huge decision, and I need to be sure I can handle everything that comes with being your wife." He nodded slowly, pulling her closer. "How much time?" "I don't know. A few days? A week? Take as long as you need." He kissed her forehead. "I'll wait." But Elena didn't need a week. She didn't even need a few days. Because that evening, as she was putting Lucia to bed, the baby looked up at her with those serious brown eyes and said, "Mama, stay? Forever?" And Elena's heart made the decision her brain was still trying to rationalize. "Forever, baby, I promise." Lucia smiled, that beautiful hard-won smile, and patted Elena's face. "Papa, too?" "Papa, too." "Good." Lucia yawned and snuggled into her pillow. "Love, Mama. Love, Papa. We love you too, sweetheart. So much." Elena waited until Lucia was deeply asleep, then went to find Dante. He was in his study, staring at his computer without really seeing it, and he looked up when she entered. "That was fast," he said. "Did you forget something?" "No. I made a decision." Elena crossed to his desk and leaned against it. "Ask me again." Hope flared in his eyes. "Elena Moretti, will you marry me?" "Yes?" The word came out strong and sure. "Yes, I'll marry you." He was around the desk in seconds, lifting her and spinning her around, and Elena laughed against his mouth as he kissed her. When he finally set her down, they were both breathless and grinning like idiots. "When?" he asked. "Whenever you want." "Tomorrow." Elena laughed. "Maybe give me a little more time than that. I'd like to actually plan a wedding." "Fine. Next month, but not a day longer." He pulled a small box from his desk drawer, and Elena's breath caught when he opened it to reveal a ring. Simple, elegant, with a single diamond that caught the light. "This was my grandmother's. I know it's old-fashioned, but it's perfect." Elena held out her hand, and he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. "How did you know my size?" "I have my ways." He kissed her knuckles, his lips lingering on the ring. "You're mine now." "I was always yours. From the moment I picked up your crying daughter in that hospital. My brave, beautiful girl." He pulled her close, and they stood there in the quiet study, holding each other and planning a future that should have been impossible. But 3 days later, everything changed again. FBI agent Morrison approached Elena at her grandmother's nursing home, his badge already out when she turned to face him. She'd been expecting this, had known eventually law enforcement would come asking questions, but the reality of it still made her heart race. "Miss Moretti, I'm Agent Morrison. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your relationship with Dante Rossi." Elena glanced at Carlo, who stood a few feet away, his hand already moving toward his weapon. "I don't have to answer your questions." "No, you don't, but it would be in your best interest to cooperate." Morrison's smile was all teeth. "We know you're living with a known criminal. We know you were present during the attack at the medical building. We know you're engaged to be married to a man who's under investigation for racketeering, murder, and about 24 other charges. Then you know more than I do. Elena kept her voice steady. I'm a music therapist caring for his daughter. That's all. Is that what you tell yourself? Morrison stepped closer, lowering his voice. Listen, Miss Moretti, I've seen this story play out a dozen times. Nice girl falls for the bad guy, thinks she can change him, ends up either dead or in prison. You seem smart. Don't let him drag you down with him. Are you done? I'm trying to help you. We can offer witness protection, a new identity, relocation, financial support. All you have to do is testify about what you've seen. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not concern but ambition. This man didn't care about her safety. He cared about making his case, about advancing his career, about taking down Dante Rossi no matter the cost. No, she said firmly. Think about what you're giving up. Your freedom, your future, maybe your life. For what? A man who kills people for a living? For my family. Elena straightened her spine. Now if you're done, I have a grandmother to visit. Morrison's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. That's my choice to make. She walked past him, Carlo, falling into step beside her, and didn't look back. But her hands shook as she signed in at the nursing home desk, and she had to take several deep breaths before she felt steady enough to see her grandmother. By the time she returned to the mansion, Dante's lawyers had already handled it. Morrison had been reassigned to a different case, his superiors suddenly very interested in some financial irregularities in his own conduct. Elena didn't ask how Dante had managed it. She didn't want to know. But the encounter had shaken her, had reminded her that the outside world saw her choices very differently than she did, and when photos of her with Dante and Lucia at a charity gala appeared online, the judgment came swift and brutal. Her former colleagues at St. Mary's called, their voices a mixture of concern and horror. Elena, what are you doing? This man is dangerous. You need to get out of there. Her grandmother cried when Elena visited, begging her to reconsider, to come home, to choose safety over whatever twisted thing she thought she felt for Dante. Social media erupted with speculation and condemnation. Mafia boss's nanny became a trending topic, with people she'd never met weighing in on her choices, her character, her sanity. Elena bore it all with as much grace as she could muster, but late at night, alone in the room she now shared with Dante, the doubts crept in. She'd given up everything. Her career, her reputation, her old life, for a man and a child who weren't even hers by blood. What if she'd made a terrible mistake? What if everyone else was right and she was just too blind to see it? One particularly bad night, she actually packed a bag, stood in the closet with her few belongings and seriously considered leaving. She could go to her grandmother's, start over, rebuild the life she'd had before Dante Rossi crashed into it. But then Lucia had a nightmare. The baby's screams cut through the house and Elena was moving before she'd made a conscious decision. She found Lucia in her crib, thrashing and crying, and when Elena lifted her, the baby clung to her desperately. "Mama, Mama, don't go. I'm here, sweetheart, I'm right here. Promise. Promise stay?" Elena's throat tightened. "I promise." Dante appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene. Elena in her pajamas with Lucia in her arms, the packed bag visible in their bedroom beyond. He didn't say anything, just watched as Elena rocked his daughter back to sleep, singing the lullaby that had started everything. When Lucia finally settled, Elena transferred her back to the crib and turned to face Dante. He stood perfectly still, his expression carefully blank, and Elena realized he'd been expecting this, expecting her to leave. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I saw the bag. I know, I'm sorry, I needed to know I could leave, that I was choosing to stay." "And are you? Choosing to stay?" Helena crossed to him, taking his face in her hands. "Yes, I'm choosing you. I'm choosing Lucia. I'm choosing this life, with all its complications and danger and impossibility. She kissed him softly. "I'm choosing us, Dante, for better or worse." His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she felt him shaking slightly. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the darkness, and Elena felt the last of her doubts dissolve. This was her family. This was her home. And she was done apologizing for it. The proposal came 2 weeks later on the rooftop terrace at sunset. Dante had been nervous all day, snapping at his men, pacing the house, checking his watch constantly. Elena had pretended not to notice, but her own stomach had been in knots. When he finally asked her to come upstairs, she found the terrace transformed. Candles everywhere, rose petals scattered across the stone, and a small table set for two. The city sprawled below them, lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness, and the air smelled of jasmine and possibility. "What's all this?" Elena asked, even though she knew. "I couldn't wait any longer." Dante took her hands, and she felt them trembling slightly. "I know I already asked you to marry me. I know you already said yes. But I wanted to do this properly, to give you the romance you deserve." "Dante, let me finish." He took a deep breath. "You came into my life when everything was broken, when I'd lost hope, lost my way, lost the ability to connect with my own daughter. And you fixed it. You fixed us. Not with grand gestures or demands or judgment, but with compassion and patience and love." Elena's vision blurred with tears. "You took a bullet for Lucia. You chose us over your old life. You've stood by me through things that should have sent you running." He released one of her hands to pull out a small box. "So I'm asking you again, properly this time. Elena Moretti, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Lucia's mother, and the light that keeps us from drowning in darkness?" "Yes." The word came out choked. "Yes, of course, yes." He opened the box to reveal the same ring he'd shown her before, his grandmother's ring, simple and perfect. He slid it onto her finger again, and this time it felt different. Final, like a promise being sealed. "I love you," he said, pulling her into his arms. "I love you too." They kissed as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Elena felt something settle in her chest. This was right. This was real. This was forever. A small voice from the doorway made them break apart. "Papa? Mama?" Lucia stood there in her pajamas holding a flower that was clearly meant for Elena. She'd obviously been coached, and the sight of her serious little face as she walked forward made Elena's heart melt. "For Mama," Lucia said, presenting the flower solemnly. Elena knelt too. "Take it," pulling Lucia into a hug. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's beautiful." "Mama marry Papa?" "Yes, baby. Mama's going to marry Papa." Lucia beamed and threw her arms around Elena's neck. "Good. Want Mama forever. You've got me forever, both of you." Dante joined them on the terrace floor, wrapping his arms around both of them, and they stayed like that as the stars began to appear overhead. A family, unconventional and complicated, but real. The wedding happened 6 months later in the mansion's garden, in the same spot where Lucia had first laughed. It was small, just 50 guests, mostly Dante's organization and Elena's grandmother, but it was perfect. Lucia served as flower girl, taking her role so seriously that she counted each petal as she dropped it, and when she reached the end of the aisle, she announced loudly, "Mama's turn." The guests laughed, and Elena walked down the aisle alone, having chosen to give herself away. She wore a simple white dress that Sophia's dressmaker had created, and when she reached Dante, the look on his face made her breath catch. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You're not so bad yourself." The ceremony was brief and emotional. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises of love and protection and family. When the officiant declared them married, Lucia cheered and clapped, and the sound of her joy was the sweetest music Elena had ever heard. The reception was surprisingly normal. Good food, dancing, laughter. Elena's grandmother cried through the whole thing but admitted that Dante made her granddaughter happy. Carlo, recovered from his injuries, gave a toast about how Elena had tamed the beast, and when Dante swept Elena onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife, the world fell away. "Any regrets?" he asked, holding her close. "Not a single one. Even knowing what our life will be like? Especially knowing that." Elena rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I chose this, Dante. I chose you, and I'd choose you again every single day." His arms tightened around her. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. I know you will." They danced until Lucia demanded to join them, and then all three of them swayed together while the guests watched and applauded. It was messy and chaotic and absolutely perfect. The months that followed brought a new kind of normalcy. Elena established her music therapy foundation, using Dante's legitimate business profits to help traumatized children across the city. She worked from home mostly, balancing her calling with motherhood, and found a satisfaction she'd never known in her old life. Dante kept his promise to transition away from the most violent aspects of his business. He wouldn't leave it entirely, but he delegated more, took fewer risks, prioritized coming home to his family. The darkness was still there, but it no longer consumed him. Lucia thrived. She talked constantly now, sang songs Elena taught her, showed no lasting trauma from her early experiences. She started calling Elena Mama without hesitation, and Dante Papa with equal love. She was bright and curious and full of life, and watching her grow was the greatest joy Elena had ever known. One afternoon, about a year after the wedding, Elena took Lucia to the pediatrician's office for a regular checkup. A different office in a different building, with different security protocols. In the waiting room, they encountered a young mother struggling with a screaming toddler while other patients deliberately looked away. Elena recognized herself in that moment, saw the exhaustion and desperation in the mother's face, saw the way everyone else pretended not to notice. She stood up, Lucia's hand in hers, and approached the woman. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the crying child. The mother looked at her with such relief. "Please, I don't know what's wrong. He won't stop crying." Elena knelt beside the toddler and began singing softly, the same lullaby that had started everything. The child's cries faltered, then stopped, and he looked at Elena with wide, curious eyes. Lucia watched her mother help, then toddled over and patted the toddler's hand gently. "It's okay," she said in her small, serious voice. "Mama makes it better." The toddler reached for Lucia, and the two children hugged while Elena continued singing. The mother started crying, grateful, overwhelmed tears, and Elena understood completely. "Thank you," the mother whispered. "Thank you so much." "You're welcome." Elena stood, scooping Lucia up. "It gets easier, I promise." As they left the office, Lucia looked up at Elena with those wise brown eyes. "Mama helped, like Mama helped me." "That's right, sweetheart. We help people who need us. I help too. You helped perfectly." Lucia beamed and snuggled against Elena's shoulder, and Elena felt her heart swell with pride and love. This was her daughter, not by blood, but by choice and sacrifice and love. And she was teaching her to be kind, to help others, to spread compassion in a world that desperately needed it. Dante was waiting when they got home, and Lucia immediately launched into an excited explanation of how she'd helped the crying boy. He listened with rapt attention, praising her kindness, and when Lucia ran off to play, he pulled Elena into his arms. "She's growing up so fast," he said. "I know. Sometimes I can barely remember her as that terrified baby in the hospital." "I can. I remember every second of that night." He kissed her temple. "I remember thinking my life was over, that I'd lost everything that mattered. And then you appeared and proved me wrong. We saved each other, Elena corrected gently. Yeah, we did. They stood there in the foyer of their home, holding each other while their daughter's laughter echoed from the playroom, and Elena marveled at how far they'd come. From that desperate night in the hospital to this moment of perfect peace, it seemed impossible, but it was real. 3 years later, Elena stood in the same garden where Lucia had first laughed, one hand resting on her pregnant belly while her daughter played nearby. Lucia was 4 now, confident and bright, with her father's determination and her mother's compassion. She was learning piano, already showing musical talent that made Elena's heart sing. "Mama, watch!" Lucia called, doing a cartwheel that was more enthusiasm than technique. "Beautiful, baby." Dante appeared behind Elena, his arms wrapping around her waist, his hands covering hers on her belly. "How's our son doing?" "Active. I think he's going to be a handful." "Good. Takes after his mother." Elena laughed and leaned back against him. "His father, you mean?" "Both of us, then." He pressed a kiss to her neck. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Only 3 times. You're slacking." "I love you." Another kiss. "I love you." Another. "I love you." "Better." Lucia ran over, pressing her ear to Elena's belly. "Hi, baby brother. It's Lucia. I'm your big sister. I'm going to teach you songs and help you not be scared and be the best big sister ever." Elena's eyes filled with tears. Happy tears this time. "He's very lucky to have you." "I know." Lucia patted Elena's belly gently, then looked up at Dante. "Papa, can we have ice cream?" "After dinner." "But I want it now." "After dinner," Dante repeated, but his voice was gentle. "Nice try, though." Lucia huffed but accepted the answer, running back to her toys. Dante and Elena watched her, this miracle child who'd brought them together, and Elena felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "I never thought I'd have this," she said quietly. "A family, a home, this kind of happiness." "Neither did I." Dante turned her in his arms, his hands cradling her face. "You gave me everything, Elena. Everything I thought I'd lost. Everything I didn't know I could have. We gave it to each other." They kissed as the sun set, painting the garden in golden light, and Lucia's laughter provided the perfect soundtrack. This was their life now, messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. Elena's music therapy foundation had grown beyond her wildest dreams. She worked with dozens of children each month, using music to heal trauma and build resilience. Other families in Dante's world had noticed, had started treating women and children better, knowing that Dante's transformation was due to love and compassion. The ripple effects continued spreading. Former associates sought therapy for their own children. Rival families called truces rather than risk their children's well-being. The entire landscape of their world had shifted, and Elena was at the center of it, not through force or violence, but through simple, persistent kindness. Lucia wanted to be a music therapist like her mother. She practiced with her toy instruments, helping Elena during sessions, already showing the empathy and patience the work required. Watching her daughter grow into someone who wanted to heal others made Elena's heart overflow. One evening, as Elena was putting Lucia to bed, the little girl looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mama, tell me again how you and Papa met." Elena smiled, settling beside her on the bed. "Well, once upon a time, there was a baby girl who was very scared and very sad. She was crying in a hospital, and everyone walked away because they were too busy or too frightened to help her. But you didn't walk away," Lucia said, having heard this story many times. "No, I didn't. I heard her crying, and I couldn't leave her alone. So I picked her up and I sang to her, and she stopped crying. And then Papa came. And he was so grateful that someone had helped his daughter that he asked me to stay and help her heal. And you fell in love," Elena laughed. "Eventually, yes. But first we became a family. We learned to trust each other and care for each other and be there for each other. And that love grew from taking care of you." Lucia thought about this for a moment. "So, I'm the reason you and Papa are together?" "You're the reason we found each other. Love is what kept us together." "I'm glad you found me, Mama." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Elena sang the lullaby, the same one from that first night, and Lucia's eyes drifted closed. Elena stayed there for a while, watching her daughter sleep, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. When she finally left the room, she found Dante waiting in the hallway. He pulled her into his arms without a word, and they stood there in the quiet house, holding each other. "I heard you telling her our story," he said. "She asks almost every night. What do you tell her about me? About what I do?" Elena pulled back to look at him. "I tell her that you're a good man who sometimes has to do hard things to protect the people you love, that you're not perfect but you try your best, and that you love her and me more than anything in the world. That's generous." "It's true." Elena touched his face. "You're not the same man you were when we met, Dante. You've changed, grown, become someone who chooses love over violence whenever possible. Because of you. Because of us. All of us." She took his hand and placed it on her belly. "This family you've built, it's made you better, just like it's made me braver." They stood there in the hallway, feeling their son move beneath Dante's palm, and Elena thought about that night in the hospital, how she'd had no idea that picking up a crying baby would lead to this, to love and family and a life she'd never imagined. "Do you ever regret it?" Dante asked, reading her thoughts. That night in the hospital, walking over to Lucia instead of walking away. "Never." Elena's answer was immediate and absolute. "That moment changed my life. Changed all our lives. How could I regret the best decision I ever made? Even knowing everything that came after? The danger, the violence, especially knowing that?" Elena cut him off with a kiss. "I chose this life, Dante. I chose you, and I'd make the same choice 1,000 times over." His arms tightened around her, and she felt him shaking slightly. "I don't know what I did to deserve you. You loved your daughter enough to let a stranger help her. You were vulnerable enough to admit you needed someone. You were brave enough to change." Elena rested her head on his chest. "You deserved to be saved too, Dante. You just didn't know it yet." They went to bed that night wrapped around each other, and Elena dreamed of music and laughter and a future full of light. When she woke, Dante was already up, standing by the window and watching the sunrise. "Come back to bed," she murmured. He turned, and the love in his eyes still took her breath away after all this time. "I was just thinking." "About?" "About how different my life would be if you hadn't walked over to Lucia that night, if you'd been like everyone else and just looked away. But I didn't. No, you didn't." He came back to bed, gathering her in his arms. "You saw a child who needed help and you helped her, even though you had no idea what it would cost you." "It didn't cost me anything. It gave me everything. It gave us everything." They lay there as the sun rose, talking about baby names and Lucia's upcoming recital and the Foundation's expansion plans. Normal things, happy things. The kind of things Elena had never imagined discussing with a Mafia boss. But Dante wasn't just a Mafia boss anymore. He was her husband, Lucia's father, their son's future dad. He was the man who read bedtime stories and made silly faces to get Lucia to eat her vegetables and rubbed Elena's feet when they were swollen from pregnancy. He was complicated and flawed and sometimes still dangerous. But he was hers. The months passed in a blur of preparation. They converted one of the guest rooms into a nursery, painting it soft blue and filling it with toys and books. Lucia helped pick out everything, taking her role as big sister very seriously. When Elena went into labor, it was Lucia who noticed first. "Mama, you okay? I think it's time to meet your brother, sweetheart." Chaos erupted. Dante called the doctor, the staff prepared the medical wing, and Lucia held Elena's hand and told her baby brother to be nice to Mama and come out easy. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and when Elena finally held her son, Marco, named after Dante's father, she felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. Dante stood beside the bed with tears streaming down his face, and Lucia climbed up carefully to meet her brother. "He's so small," Lucia whispered, touching Marco's tiny hand with one finger. "You were this small once," Elena said. "Really? Really? And you cried just as much?" Lucia giggled and looked at Dante. "Papa, can I hold him?" They arranged Lucia carefully on the bed with pillows supporting her arms and placed Marco in her lap. The baby opened his eyes, dark like his father's, and seemed to study his sister seriously. "Hi, Marco," Lucia said softly. "I'm Lucia. I'm your big sister. I'm going to protect you and teach you stuff and love you forever and ever." Elena's throat tightened and she met Dante's eyes over their children's heads. He was crying openly now, and she realized she was too. This was their family, built from tragedy and choice and love, imperfect and unconventional and absolutely beautiful. "I love you," Dante mouthed to Elena. "I love you too," she mouthed back. They stayed like that for hours, the four of them together in the medical wing while the world continued outside. Dante's phone rang repeatedly, but he ignored it. Nothing was more important than this moment, this family, this love they'd built from ashes. As the sun set, casting golden light through the windows, Elena looked at her husband and children and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about that night in the hospital, about the scared music therapist who'd picked up a crying baby while everyone else walked away. She'd had no idea that simple act of compassion would lead to this, to a family, a home, a love that transformed everything. But she wouldn't change a single moment, wouldn't take back a single choice, because every step of the journey had led her here, to this room, to these people, to this life. Lucia started singing the lullaby, the one Elena had taught her, the one that had started everything. And Marco's eyes drifted closed. Dante wrapped his arms around Elena, and they listened to their daughter sing their son to sleep. "We did good," Dante whispered. "We did amazing," Elena corrected. And in that moment, surrounded by the family she'd chosen and who'd chosen her back, Elena knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey had been terrifying and painful and full of impossible choices, but it had brought her home. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is help a stranger. Sometimes a lullaby changes everything. Sometimes love grows in the darkest places and becomes the light that guides you home. Elena had walked over to a crying baby when everyone else walked away, and that single act of compassion had transformed 3 broken people into a family. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd chosen, and she'd choose it again, every single time. Thank you so much for reading this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Share this with someone who needs to believe in the power of compassion and second chances. Drop a comment telling me which moment made you cry. I read every single one and love hearing from you. Your support means everything and helps me create more stories like this. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.